Hey gang, in this tutorial I'm going to walk through the homework assignment for cleaning stuff up in this particular shot. There was another tutorial that walked through object removal using masking, and that's all I'm going to do here. Nothing fancy, no rotoscoping or anything like that. That covered the basics, but I know some people were having problems getting some of the tweaks in a little more complicated setup like this to look correct. So I want to walk you through part of this and show you some common pitfalls and some ways to avoid them. So first off, let's just take a look at the shot here. Obviously we got this case to remove. I'm going to save that for later and start with the boom shadow here because that's actually the more complex thing to do. And if I sort of scroll through here, you can see first off that there's some lighting change. Looks like maybe we got some fluorescent lights where there's a flicker that's not quite matching the scan rate of the camera. That's why you get these lines going up if I go through it quickly. You don't see that in real time, right? So if I'm just playing this in real time, you can't see that flicker, but you can definitely see it if we're scrolling through quickly to know there's some kind of mismatch there with the camera scan rate and the lighting. These are not film lights in my house. One of the things with lights designed specifically for production is that they are designed to not give you this sort of flicker. So if you have something, even if it's a fluorescent looking light like a Kino or something like that, it's actually designed and run through a ballast to not give that kind of flicker. Okay, so if I'm scrolling through this, you can actually see I've got a boom shadow in here kind of the whole time. Now, one thing you want to be aware of with your visual effects is kind of when something matters and when it doesn't. When I start scrolling through, you'll actually see, you can see this here is the boom shadow. I think there's a little bit of it here, but it doesn't look distracting right now. I'm not noticing it. It looks like it could be perfectly normal. When I start to notice things is when they move. So you can see now I'm getting definitely some moving shadows coming through. I actually get the boom itself coming in at that point, all the way the pole comes in, and then actually the boom itself comes into the shot. Then I get some really obvious shadows right over these middle cabinets here. My point is that this shot has a lot of boom problems in it. Some of these we would really have to fix. This we obviously would. Some of these more obvious shadows, and where the boom is moving, so even if I play this at real time, you can see that shadow kind of moving along here. At the very beginning, this was less of an issue because yes, there was a little angle here, but we don't notice it till it starts moving, till the boom starts moving. So there's something to be aware of if you're trying to be efficient in your visual effects, is to think about what parts do I need to worry about and what parts can I actually kind of get away with leaving as they are. If it's something that, you know, maybe there was this tiny bit of shadow here, but the boom was locked in place, never moves an inch. And I'd say, you know, I'm not even going to worry about removing that. No one's going to know that's a boom shadow. It could be anything else. Okay, so first thing I want to do is find a place where I can just grab some clean footage to overlay on things. And what you'd like to do is find the longest chunk that you can. And something I know that some people were running into was seeing flickering because you were grabbing really short sections of this and you kind of see it looping because the lighting changes slightly from the beginning of the shot to the end of the shot. And the more you loop it, the more that sort of flicker becomes obvious. So I want to grab a long chunk if I can. In this case, probably this section here at the end is where it looks like there's actually no boom pulse. That's a great chunk for me to grab. So I'm going to duplicate this, Command D, and I'm going to just grab that chunk, Option left bracket to shorten that down to just that part. And it looks like that's okay all the way through the end of that shot. So I'm going to leave that as is. And the other thing is there's often a temptation to try to mask out a whole shot at once. And if you can do that and get away with it, great. But also that can be problematic because then you end up looping, you know, a lot of things. So we can try looping this shot and see how it works, but I'm okay with, I was really looking for something where there's nothing over here because this is where there's shadows the most often. And I might use this for that and then see if I need to grab something else to cover some of this other stuff where the shadows over here, over here. I might be able to find some longer segments for that. For instance, like this whole opening part here, you know, I've got 6 or 7 seconds with no shadows over here. So that might be a nice long chunk I can grab for that part. But let's start with this chunk here. Not bad to start by trying to see if we could just mask out the whole thing. There's nothing else happening in this shot, so why not? And I'm going to mask just sort of this whole top area where it looks like any of the boom shadows were. And let's give ourselves, you know, a nice solid feather there. And this is really a pretty easy shot because aside from the boom, there's nothing moving through here, right? If we have people moving back and forth through here while the boom shadows are there, we're going to need to be a lot more cautious with our masking and probably going to have to do a lot more manual cleanup. In this case, I'm going to do that and pull this back here. Okay, so I've got this layer masking out the boom shadow. It looks like correctly. I'm not seeing any weird shadows or any glitches along my mask edge here. And then what I could try doing is just loop this through the whole rest of this sequence. And there's a really nice automatic way to do a bunch of these in After Effects. So I'm going to show you one manually so you understand kind of what the concept is, and then I'll show you how to do it automatically. So I'm going to just Command D, make a duplicate of this. And what I don't want to do, let's zoom in a little here, is kind of just loop it so one ends exactly where the next one starts. Because the problem with that is, zoom out here a little bit, I might be able to see a flicker at that transition moment. And you saw it. You saw the lighting change because it's a hard cut. And even though this image looks static, again, as we saw when I sort of scrolled through it very quickly, there's some changing going on with the light. And that's going to be apparent when I do something like this. So instead what I'm going to do is back this up so there's some overlap. And then I'll go down into my opacity. And I could do this by going down here, hit transform, and there's my opacity. And I could adjust it that way. There's also some handy keyboard shortcuts for some of these basic commands here that are worth knowing. So T is opacity. T is in Tom. If I hit that, it's just going to pull up the opacity or toggle it back. If I hit P, that's going to do my position. If I hit S, that's going to do my scale. So a couple of really handy things there. So I'll just hit T, pull up my opacity, and I'm going to make a keyframe here and set this to 0. And then I'll go to kind of right at the end of the part where they're overlapping and make another keyframe and set this to 100. So what I'm doing is they're going to overlap, and the second that this one's coming in, it's going to gradually fade in on top of the other one and be totally faded in by the time this other clip ends. And that way, if we play through this, we never get that hard cut. So you never see that clear flicker. It's much more gradual fade in. And then I could do the same thing again. I could duplicate this layer. In this case, this will duplicate with the keyframes already created. If I pull down T, you can see there's keyframes there. And I can scoot this along to here. And I could duplicate it again and scoot it along to here. And I could get a whole section that plays through here with all those boom shadows covered. So that's the manual way to do this, and that's what we're going for. I'm going to step backwards here to our original layer and show you an automatic way to do that whole thing. So I'm just going to make myself a whole bunch of layers. Just duplicate, Command D, a whole bunch of these. I'm going to select all of them. Right click. And this is not necessarily obvious where this would be, which is why I'm pointing it out. It's under Keyframe Assistant. There's an option for Sequence Layers. So I'm going to do that and say I want them to overlap. You can uncheck this box if you want them to literally one ends and then the other one starts right after it. But like I just said, we don't want to do that because we'll get this flicker. I'm going to go with overlap. Make them overlap 1 second in different sorts of transitions. You can turn it off. I want to do exactly what I just did, which is dissolve the front layer. So that front layer is going to fade in, or actually the way that this does, it does literally the reverse of what I just did, is the top layer will fade out and it goes to a lower layer. And you can see it sequence these out like that. If I pull out our opacity, you can see it made these little fades. And we've got that boom shadow gone for almost the whole thing. Oh, uh-oh. You know, I'm just noticing right over here in that chunk that we chose to use, we've got a little bit of a boom shadow there. So that's something I'm going to have to go and get rid of. And I think maybe actually if I just made my mask go down a little more like that. That would have covered it. Okay, so I really should have done that for all these. I'm not going to go back and rechange the mask on all of them, but you can see how that would have fixed it. And you see the process of doing this. Also, as it turns out, I didn't quite duplicate enough layers to get us, or maybe I did, to get us all the way through the sequence. I did. So we got all the way through the end of the sequence. So if I just had got my math set correct, that whole thing would have been fixed. Okay, so that's taking care of the boom for us. Let's take a look at this case down here. H for the hand tool. And, you know, the bad news here, such as it is we don't have a clean shot of this. That is, we don't have a moment where this case isn't here and we can just grab a clean section of this floor and bottom of the cabinets and replace it with that. That would be really nice if we had. Unfortunately, we don't, so we're going to have to try to replace it with something else. And this is going to be one of those cases where it's going to take a little bit of guesswork. And then we're going to end up doing the same thing. So something I'm going to go ahead and do here just to clean this up a little bit. Again, if this were a real shot, I would be going back and cleaning up that little bit of boom shadow that snuck in here on all these. For demonstration purposes, you got the point of it. I'm going to take all these, right click, and pre-compose this. And say cover up boom shadows. Just to simplify things down. So now it looks like I'm back to 2 layers. My original layer and then the thing that covers up the boom is this layer, which just combines the attributes of all those over the course of the whole shot. So let's look at this. I'm going to again duplicate my original and see what we can do with this. And it's a little bit of trial and error. Push G, go to this tool, and maybe the first thing I'll try is see if I can grab this section of floor here and just kind of see how that looks. So I'll rough something in there. Move this over. Okay, that's not terrible. It's not great. The gap in the cabinets here is a little wider than the one here. So I think what I'm actually going to do is shrink this mask down. Try to just cover up this cabinet here. And move it, and I'm trying to align the sort of shadows here and make sure this cabinet exactly lines up. Okay, and then let's get another copy of this. And I'm going to grab a mask for the other side of the cabinet. Okay, and line that up. And so the colors don't exactly match here, but I've gotten the lines matched, which is really what I'm going for at this point. And I can go back to this one and see if I can stretch this out, but I think it's going to start to run into the, yeah. So we're going to need one more chunk of something. And here I'll go ahead, I'm going to grab another layer. So you can see what I'm doing is I'm compiling pieces of multiple layers to kind of come together and end up covering up the whole thing. Okay, and let's see how my lines are there. Maybe this one needs to come up just a hair. Something like that. Okay, and actually I'm going to grab a clean chunk of floor too, because you can see the shadow. If I turn off all these, got the shadow of that case coming down here, and even when I start covering up the case, I'm still getting that shadow here. So let's make one more layer. I say one more, we might need several more, we'll see. And I'm going to grab this kind of clean chunk of floor over here. And drag that over. And I've also got a little mismatch in seams over here, you can see. that I want to clean up. So I'm going to grab a clean chunk of this lower area. I'm just going to kind of hug very close to the cabinets themselves there. And I want to actually make sure this is in front of those other things. And do I have some extra room? No, I'm going to run into that. So it's going to take me one more layer yet again. Let's duplicate that. And just move it over a little bit here. Okay, and you're noticing, you know, this bottom wasn't exactly flat, so I'm getting a little bit of a mismatch here if I line up over here. And I'm going to fix that with just a very, very slight rotation on this layer. So I'm going to rotate it minus like 0.1 degrees. Or maybe just 0.1 degrees. I always forget which way I want to rotate these things. That was the wrong way. Okay, so I do want to go minus. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's go to our feathering on our masks. And shortcut key for that is F to pull up the feathering. I'm just going to each of these, feathering them out a little bit. Okay. And let's see what we've got now. Not too bad. I've got a bit of a mismatch here. I'll still need to go clean up. And I've got this definite clear change in shadow here. This is one where sometimes I like to go, just look back at the original footage for a second. See what was there. Okay, so looks like there's a pretty clear shadow gradient here. And I think what's happening here is we've just grabbed one chunk of something that's a little darker than this other stuff. And let's see where that is. Okay, so it's this chunk of floor was a little lighter. So let me go back here and grab myself a little darker chunk of floor. And let's feather that out a little bit. Okay, and then I got this chunk here where it's a little bit darker. I think that's from this. Yes. So let's see, can I do something about that? Okay, now I just got this little bit here. And I think what I'm going to do is make kind of two layers here. So one like that. I'm just going to do a little bit of feathering too. And then I'm going to make another mask. Over here to the right of it, it's going to have a lot more feathering. And then let's take this whole layer, move it over there, put it in front of some of these other things to get a kind of smoother gradient there. Okay, this isn't looking too bad. I've still got one hard edge here, not super hard, but you can see this area here is a little bit brighter. It kind of stands out when we pull out and kind of look at the whole thing. You can see that area is brighter, so let's see where that's coming from. If I was smart, I would label my layers so I could tell what was what. And I think that's this one. Okay, so a couple things I could try. One is if I just pull this down, it's not covering as much of that. That might be enough to make it less noticeable. I think that works okay. If that hadn't worked, I could also go in and play with the curves on this, try to adjust it. I guess just so we see that example. Go in here, and that one was just a little bright, so I'm just going to try to pull it just a hair darker. Too much. Yeah. I still got something here. Maybe this one is part of it as well. Let's throw some curves on this. And it's really that brighter area that's getting a little dark. And then pull this back to normal. Yeah. Okay. That's not bad now. I could obviously always do more cleanup. I'm still getting a little bit of a sharp edge here. I would go in and place it. But here's the main takeaway. I think where some people are running into problems is you're trying to find like one chunk of something you can drop in and that works. And sometimes that you can, and that's great. And that's kind of what we ended up doing with the boom at the top. Other times you really have to piece something together and make it work. This still needs some more work. I need to darken this area here a little bit. I need to fix this little seam that's showing up there. But generally looks pretty good. My lines all look pretty straight. I'm not getting any places where obviously something jumps. That's usually a giveaway for an effect. And now what I'm going to do is, because nothing's moving in this shot, I can just let these play the whole way through. I would actually stop and look, because the lighting is shifting a little bit, look across multiple frames and watch through my whole shot and make sure there's no place where a lighting glitch or a lighting change makes something stand out or jump or look like a glitch, and play with those. I also, just for organizational purposes, once I've got those all done, I'll pre-compose this. If I was going to continue to do more work on this, and say remove case on ground. Okay, so now I've got this whole thing fixed up. I'm going to actually rename this and say this is now my cleaned up kitchen shot. Cleaned up kitchen shot. And I'm going to take all these layers that are within here, and I will pre-compose this into something else, and I'll call this stuff cleaning up the boom, shadow, and case. Okay, so now I just have this single layer in here, so if I needed to do more visual effects on this, I could take this thing that just says cleaned up kitchen shot, and it's just got one layer. It is the kitchen shot. Now anything I do to this, I'm doing to the whole thing. So if I wanted to do some, color correction on it, I got this thing as a single layer now. I can throw curves on it, and anything I do, is now affecting the entire shot. It's not just affecting the particular parts that I did or that I have to do individually to each layer. It's the whole thing now. And that's the beauty of sort of a pre-composition. There are other reasons why we like to do those, but one of the simple ones is just makes this whole thing a lot easier, because now I've just got something that looks in my timeline like a single chunk of footage that has all the cleanup already done on it, and I can just work with this as a single shot now instead of dealing with all the sub layers. So hopefully that clarifies some of this if anyone was still confused about object removal using masks. It's a really powerful technique. It takes a little trial and error sometimes to get the right chunks and to build the right masks on top of things. The main takeaways I would like you to have from this are two things. One is if you're cleaning up or removing things via masks and you have to loop things, layer them, use some opacity changes or whatever else you might need, some mask changes sometimes, to make sure those transitions are smooth and we don't see things looping or see those cut points, because that's what really draws attention to itself as an effect. Second, it is great if you can find one big mask that will cover something or remove something for the entirety of the shot and you don't need to mess with it. That's awesome. That is not always the case. And so don't be afraid to find little pieces of things, whether that's pieces in time. So like this section works for these couple of seconds and then I need a different section for the next couple seconds. Or as I did here with removing the case, finding little pieces of things to fix parts of the case and remove parts of the case, and then combining those all together, feathering them, and getting it to the point where I have one finished looking effect. And again, this is not finished in terms of production quality. I would still need to fix that bit of boom shadow that snuck into my mask up here, or sorry, that I forgot to mask. It snuck outside the mask up here. And then down here by the cabinet, I still got a little bit of cleanup. The most noticeable thing is this hard edge here. But also I'd like to clean up this floor a little bit more. You can sort of tell where some things are overlapping and feathering. But in terms of demonstration of the technique or something for this homework assignment, this would be fine. You can definitely see what goes into it. And really the only difference if I was really polishing this up is nothing to do with the techniques. It's just spending more time really fine-tuning every little bit and making sure everything looks exactly right. So it's not a difference of technique or what you're doing. It's just a difference of how precise you're trying to be with it. So that is that, and hopefully clears up any issues with object removal and masks.